Tonight I will be sharing 6 stories, from home break-ins to urban exploring, and more. We will be covering tales of both the supernatural and people up to no good. A huge thank you to the writers for allowing me to share their stories. Remember, you can send in your own story to rylhstories@gmail.com. Please remember to drop a like if you enjoy, as it helps out the channel in a real way. Subscribing if you're new is also very much appreciated. Also, I apologize for not uploading for like 5 days now. I know that's really not like me to do that. I explain everything at the end, but just to sum it up now, in case I'm making this sound like a bad thing, it has a lot to do with wanting to upload quality over quantity. It's getting increasingly hard to find good stories, and with the length of my videos, it makes it difficult to hit the deadline sometimes. Enjoy the video, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. I've always had a weird knack for staying out of trouble. It's difficult to explain, but whether it be a feeling, a sense, or a tingling, it's just always been there, for as long as I can remember. I wish I could say it always made sense, or that there was always an aha moment where I understood what just happened, or even that it was a little less terrifying when it happens. But that's rarely the case. I just know it always seems to work. I'd like to tell you about one of the less vague times it happened to me. Back in my early 20s, in the late 1990s, I decided I needed a change. I left my childhood home and moved in with my uncle on the other side of the state for a couple months. Enough time to get a job, find an apartment, and get myself situated for college. This was a big move for me. I'd spent a lot of time traveling, but had never lived more than 10 miles from where I was born. It was both exciting and scary. Scales tipped more towards exciting. We lived in a backwoods town few people have heard of, even now, but close to a few major cities in Florida. When I told people where I lived, I just said, between Gainesville and St. Augustine, rather than go through the "you live where" conversation. It's a rural area, not much more than red clay and a bunch of drying up lakes well past their prime. When giving people directions to the house, we actually told them, every turn you come to, just take the one with the hard road. The first intersection without a hard road, turn right. 2 blocks past that on the left. It's the only house on that side. I don't think I've ever learned the names of all those roads on the way home. I just aimed for the hard roads. The house was pretty secluded. I don't think there was much neighborhood behind the house, just woods. The property sat on an intersection of clay roads, with woods across the street to the front, and one side of the house. The other side was an empty lot, and then more woods. I remember it was a pretty big yard, maybe a half acre or so, completely enclosed with a chain link fence. The house sat right in the middle of the property. If you walked to the edge of the yard inside the fence, you could see the neighbor's driveway a little farther up the road, on the other side. My uncle loved the place, not being able to see or hear anyone in any direction. I thought it was creepy as hell. It was a small house. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom. The living room had 2 exit doors, one to the front and one to the side. Each led out to a large porch. I know it's not a good thing, but I'm a smoker. Like a freight train kind of smoker. It's a family thing. An unhealthy curse handed down by each generation. It's like you weren't even considered an adult until you sat on Grandma's porch and smoked with her. That's how you spend time with Grandma. You sat on the front porch, chain smoked, and talked about whatever needed talking about. I sure do miss that woman. I've never cared for smoking in the house, and my uncle was trying to quit, so we set up a little smoking table and a couple of chairs on his front porch. He was an early to rise and early to bed kind of guy, and I was just the opposite. I didn't go to bed until 2 or 3 each morning, then slept in till 10 or 11. The hours you keep working at a restaurant, I guess. So I spent most of the evenings after work on the porch, usually reading a book or talking on the phone to friends back home. There wasn't much road traffic to speak of, even less after I came in from work. It was summer, and my cousin, my uncle's son from his first marriage, had come to spend a couple of weeks with his dad. We're a pretty tight-knit family, so the kid, aka Little Man, was more my little brother than my cousin. He was around 4 or 5 years old at the time. The house only had the 2 bedrooms, so we set up a pallet of blankets on the floor in the living room for him. I made a fort of it every night before he went to sleep, stretching a sheet between the couch and coffee table over his head. There were big windows next to either side of the doors going outside, and the blinds were old and kinda dog-chewed, so he liked to be covered up at night. I wasn't sure if it was so he couldn't see outside, or if he was worried something was outside seeing him. Either way, I could sympathize. On this particular night, I put him to bed and retired to the front porch. I called a friend of mine back home and proceeded to talk the night away. Kinda weird, the things we did before cell phones. We actually talked to people. I miss it sometimes. It was a typical warm southern night, mid-80s temperature, not a breath of a breeze, and humid. Nights out there could really go either way. You either had a cacophony of frogs, crickets, katydids, and the occasional alligator, or worse, you couldn't hear yourself think over the silence. The chorus of night was going strong that evening, which is actually pretty cool. If you've never heard it, each type of insect or critter sings together, matching the rest in volume and cadence, and then one crescendos, briefly shutting out the others before going back down to rejoin the chorus. Every so often, you'll hear a couple of competing solos, or duets, louder and louder until one wears out. It's mostly background stuff, and you usually tune it out, but it's neat to stop and listen, until it just stops. That was how it started. I'm talking on the phone, mostly listening honestly. The creatures are singing in the background, and I remember feeling just the briefest chill, not enough to really notice at first. But then everything went quiet. It didn't fade or lower in volume. It stopped. The chill settled in. She was still talking. I could hear her voice in my ear, but I wasn't listening anymore. I was staring into the wooded lots across the street. There wasn't anything to see over there, but I couldn't look away. I don't know if it was my uncle, a previous owner, or maybe the county, but there was a sodium vapor street light in front of the house, just outside of the chain link fence. A little to my right as I stared out there. It gave a decent amount of light to the front of the house, and was really nice when you were bringing groceries in from your car after dark. But this night really underscored my issue with the light. The bulb itself was mounted directly to the pole, rather than extending away from it. An extension of some type would have provided more light in every direction, I think. The way the bulb housing hugged the pole itself, though, hard shadows ran behind the pole across the street. Complete darkness spreading in a, guessing here, 90-degree arc behind the light pole. I guess it's just the juxtaposition of the light versus dark in that part of the yard, but the space behind the light pole was the darkest part of the night. And that's where I was looking. I tried to shake it off. Admittedly, I can get creeped out pretty easily. I've seen a lot of weird stuff, and I know I can scare myself without much help, so I try to just ignore it and get back into the conversation. I opened my mouth to say something, to chime into whatever we were talking about with something witty, I'm sure. Be quiet. It's not really a voice, but it sometimes comes across as one. I know there was no one actually talking to me, just my brain reacting to and dealing with something, so I'm well aware it's my own head when I hear a voice like that, just to be clear. But when I do hear it, I listen. This is that thing I mentioned when I started, what always keeps me out of trouble. It wasn't the first time I heard it. I could hear my friend going on through the phone at my ear, but it was distant. I could also hear something across the street. That was the summer of 1998, just remember that. And it was a North Florida summer marked by drought and fires. The underbrush was dry and crisp. Something over there had just taken a step through it. I didn't really know what to do. I could feel my heart beating in my temples. It felt like something was looking at me, through me. It was uncomfortable, and more than a little invasive feeling. I didn't like it. I wanted to go inside. Don't move. Okay, we aren't moving. Check, done. She was telling me about a new restaurant back home, how she and a few other friends had been and liked it a lot. We needed to go when I could visit again, and she stopped by to see my mom the other day and had a great time at the house. I can hear her. A dry twig cracked under its weight. I couldn't just hang up on her. If I did, she was going to call back. It struck me as a very bad thing to have the phone ring while I was out there. My hand was shaking, holding the phone to my head. Wendy, I have to go. I whispered to her. She went to say something else, but I cut her off. That thing is happening right now. I have to go. Something is out here. I'll call you later. Be careful, she said, and hung up. She and I were close friends, had been for years, and she knew what I meant. I clicked the phone off and put it on the table. It was one of those big curved cordless models with the stubby little antenna. I remember them being very popular back then. Worried she would call back, or I'd be killed because of some weird wrong number calling it at 2 o'clock in the morning. I flipped the ringer to off. Another step from across the street, and then another. It was walking faster now. It was definitely closer than when I first heard it. I braced myself, ready to jump up from the chair and run in the house. Don't. It's watching. So I didn't. I listened. I can't even explain how much I wanted to just get up and run right then. There was an exhalation. I don't really know how to explain it. Not a snort or a grunt, but a hard exhalation, then a scrape, another step. Get inside. I damn near turned the table over as I jumped up from the chair and ran for the door. It was only a few steps, but it seemed like I'd never make it. And it didn't really help that I could hear the thing across the street break into a run. Twigs and branches, snapping and crunching. Something broke over there. I guess as it ran through a bush or a low-hanging branch. Now it was out of the woods. There was a thumping as its feet hit the hard-baked clay road. Right as I made it inside the door and got it shut behind me, I heard the clang of the chain-link fence as something hit its top rail, surely vaulting over top and into our yard. Lock the door. I'd barely twisted the deadbolt in the door when the voice came again. Turn off the lights. The single light in the living room was from a weirdly elaborate light fixture attached to the ceiling fan. I called it the Venus flytrap, for the strange flowery stained glass petals surrounding the bulbs, which always tinted the light to a pale green. I grabbed the pull cord and killed the light. Slam. Something hit the door from outside. It sounded like whatever had been running at me just headbutted the door. That was the picture in my head, at least. I don't know how I didn't make a noise or scream. It scared me so bad. The blinds shook in the window beside the door, a dry rustling sound as they rubbed the wood in the frame. Hide. I thought about going in my room, which was the furthest point in the house from that door, but my cousin was sound asleep on the living room floor. I wasn't about to leave him out there by himself, but waking him up seemed like just as bad an idea. Another angry pounding against the door. The blinds shook again. I wondered how securely fastened they were to the top of the frame. What if they fell? What if they fell off the window and I ended up face to face with some thing outside staring at me? All I could think was if that happened, the streetlight would be to its back, lighting up the house, and I wouldn't be able to see it with a light in my eyes. I don't know why I even thought about that, but it scared the hell out of me. I got down on the floor and climbed into the fort we'd made earlier, between the couch and the coffee table. It seemed as good a spot as any. Little man stirred a bit as I settled in next to him, but he didn't wake up. More banging on the porch. Sounded like the table was being dragged or pulled across the wood floor out there. Another bang, and under all of that, the best word to describe it, breathing. It was somewhere between a snort or a growl, something out of breath. A quick snarl punctuated by more banging furniture. It slammed into the door again. Growled. To say I was scared is a monstrous understatement. I didn't know what the hell to do. What if it stopped hitting the door and started hitting the window? The voice in my head was quiet though, as much as I could. I just trusted it would be saying something if there was anything I should be doing, and laughed at myself for waiting on the voices in my head to tell me what to do. I probably didn't laugh right at that exact moment, but you get the idea. It jumped off the porch. I don't really know how to explain that sound, except that you could hear and feel its weight on the wood planks out there, and then it was not there. Straining my ears to hear something, anything, all I could think was that it was gone. It was going to leave us alone. Slam. This one from the door to the side of the living room. I didn't hear it over there before it hit the door. I think it might have yelped or something when it hit. Little man shook a little, but he was still sleeping. A couple more scrapes and bangs outside. Now it was panting. Again, I'm wondering about that window. It felt like luck that it didn't hit the one on the front porch. too much to hope for that it wouldn't find the one on the side porch. But it didn't. Maybe a minute or two later, or really, my perception of time was so screwed up, it could have been half a minute or half an hour. It was gone. I heard it jump down again. Its breathing faded. I braced myself for another bang, but all was quiet. I don't know how long I laid there, hugging little man to me, not really sure who was comforting and protecting who for that next little while. I eventually fell asleep, waking up to the smells of breakfast and coffee. The previous night came back to me pretty quickly. I was happy to see everyone up and around. Both my uncle and little man were up and around already, and I felt more than just a little silly climbing out from under the blanket fort built in the living room. My uncle just grinned at me, said he'd slept in the living room with the little guy a few times himself. I went for the door, really needing that first smoke of the morning. Felt like I'd earned it. Little man stopped me on the way out, surprised me, just came up and hugged me. I had to kneel down to catch him, so he wasn't just hugging my knees. It was a good hug, deep and heartfelt. He pulled away from me, looked at me like I don't think a kid has ever looked at me. "I'm really glad you're okay," he said. "I had a bad dream that you were outside and got eaten by the monster across the street." I think all my blood froze right then. Don't know if I wanted to laugh or cry. I told him I was just fine. No monsters for me. They don't think I taste good. He laughed and was done with it. He was back in the kitchen helping his dad with breakfast, and I really needed to smoke. It was my last scare of the morning, but it was a good one. Not really sure what I was expecting, but the yard around the house looked like a war zone. My smoking table was in pieces, part of it in front of the house, other parts on the side of the house, and one of the legs was out in the road. One of the chairs was near disintegrated. We never found the other one. We kept a big metal bucket full of sand on the side of the front porch, the butt bucket. It was on its side in the far back corner of the yard. It weirded me out that the sand and collection of butts, previously inside said bucket, were nowhere near the house or the bucket, but in the front corner of the yard. No matter how many times I've thought this through, that part never really made much sense. How did that thing get the bucket to the backyard? Why were the contents dumped in the front yard? What the hell was it that could have carried the bucket to the front to dump it? My uncle saw me checking out the yard, came out the front door to join me. I remember he whistled when he came out, surprised to see the yard. It's funny now, and I think I nervous laughed then. He asked if I was throwing parties after he went to bed every night. He cocked an eyebrow at me and rubbed at a fresh dent in the front door. Not quite. I wasn't sure what to do still, so I told him everything that happened the night before. To be honest, I really thought he was going to laugh at me, make fun of me for my overactive imagination, and I was never going to hear the end of it. He didn't. Instead, he told me he had a couple of weird things happen to him out there. Said it really bothered him coming home after dark, that he hated not being able to see across the street because of that street light, and that he'd seen things on the edge of the fence, but mostly across the street. We went back inside and he showed me where he kept 2 of his rifles and 1 of his handguns. Well out of sight, but easy to reach in a hurry. We went back out and cleaned the mess left in the yard. He said that with national forest on just about all sides of us, there were lots of animals we weren't used to out there. There were plenty of bobcats, coyotes, panthers, even bears, and God only knew what else. I agreed, taking some comfort in that. My overactive imagination, paired with a real-life animal, yeah, that was going to be scary, and I really wish he'd stopped there. "I think it's something else, though," he said. "Whatever it is out here feels smarter than that. I think it knows us." I don't think I'll ever forget him saying that. I tried to get him to say more, but he wouldn't, and he wouldn't ever speak about it again. I was only there for a couple more weeks, thankfully, uneventful weeks. When I left, I never went back to that house. Something about it after that night just didn't feel right. I wish I had more to tell you, or a better explanation for what exactly happened that night, but that's how it happened. I've lived alone long enough now to know to ignore the sounds my house makes. A strange humming in the middle of the night, an odd creak when the house is still, or the occasional barking of my dog. But a couple days ago, I heard a sound. A new one I hadn't heard before. A weird sort of skittering that echoed through my house. It began when I was in my room a couple of nights prior. I was laying in bed, and my TV was turned on and the volume was low. I admit, even living alone for as long as I have, I still have trouble sleeping alone in the dark. I usually watch the cooking channel, no chance of seeing anything scary pop up there. But for some reason, that night was different. I had already closed my eyes and was drifting fast asleep. There was the barely audible sizzle of a pan that I knew meant another cooking competition was going on, and it gave me comfort. But it cut off suddenly, and the light around the room felt vastly different. I opened my eyes and stared at the television. A weird sort of movie trailer was playing. It wasn't horror. I didn't feel scared or frightened. It was more like inviting. A black figure with its mouth sewn shut faced me, front and center on my television screen. Where its eyes should be were two fleshy, cavernous holes. Its limbs were unnaturally long and bent sharply at the joints. As a result, it swayed and jerked when it walked toward me. Crawled, I guess would be more accurate. It was as long as it was skinny, and it didn't seem to have the energy to put one foot in front of the other. Instead, it sat on all fours and dragged each limb my direction. But it seemed so happy. It smiled at me, its closed mouth stretching wide across its face. I felt happy, and I fell asleep before I could catch the title of the movie. I remember how warm I felt, like the figure itself had laid down next to me, enveloping me in its grasp and holding me tight. And somewhere, deep in the recesses of my mind, I can sort of recall that skittering sound around my room, almost like that of an animal. I didn't wake till noon the following day. The incessant barking of my dog Dickens gave me no other choice. I had only a vague recollection of the night before. I didn't remember ever sleeping so soundly, but for some reason, I was still so tired. I was tired that whole day. I called off work even. I forced myself up off the couch in my living room and made myself a bowl of cereal at around 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I felt slack-jawed, and I could feel my tongue moving around my mouth, exploring every inch, as if I'd never felt the sensation of tooth and tug rubbing against one another before. My eyes felt heavy, and I struggled to keep them open. I'd raised the spoon to my mouth, and the next thing I knew, I'd be awakened by a small splash of milk. My arm would fall without me realizing, and I'd drop the steel spoon down hard onto the ceramic bowl. I didn't really eat anything else that day. I abandoned my attempts to eat the cereal and moved back to my couch in the living room. I wrapped a heavy blanket around me, curled up into a ball, and turned on my trusty cooking channel. I fell asleep within seconds. It was dark when I awoke. I checked my phone, and it showed 2 o'clock. I never liked waking up at those times. When I was younger, my brother would spook me, telling me no one ever wakes up at that hour themselves. Someone always wakes you. Living alone, well, you could see how that nice bit of information might get to me. I looked around my dimly lit living room and saw nothing. I stared at my dark hallway and saw nothing. What would I see, right? I turned to look at my television and saw what it was that woke me. Or maybe I heard it first. I can't recall. I saw that same figure as the night before staring at me, and I heard that weird skittering like nails or claws against the floor. I looked at the figure through the TV screen, and it did not make a sound. Nor did it move that time. It simply stared. The noise, however, was louder. Much louder, as if the nails were tapping against my head. Feeling silly, I reached up and touched the spot behind my ears. I felt nothing, of course, but the noise was loud, and I didn't recall turning up the volume. Perhaps I had sat on the remote in my sleep, though. Weirder things have happened than that, right? I turned back to face my TV, but the creature that was staring at me through it was gone. But the commercial didn't look to have changed. I watched in amusement at this strange, frozen picture. With the creature gone, I began to notice the background and realized the place where the figure had been resting looked a lot like my house. Specifically, my living room. The wall colors were the same, and the couch wasn't in focus, but it had the same general shape. Hell, even the tiles on the floor were the same ones that my feet were touching at that very moment. I picked them up quickly and felt a jolt of electricity shoot down my spine. When I saw a shadow on the television do the same thing, I did not move. Could not move for a long time. I could see the shadow that was in the television screen, and it did not move either. I felt cold and clammy, Sweat pooled at my lower back, and I could feel my shirt stick to my skin. Sweat rolled down my forehead, and I remember feeling dangerously close to crying. I admit, I do feel a little embarrassed at this next part. I had moved my arm ever so slowly, and the shadow had done the same. I paused, and then broke into laughter, amazed at my stupidity. Or maybe relieved at it. The shadow had been just that, a shadow. My shadow. A simple reflection that happened to line up perfectly with the television. I laughed, laying back down on the couch and pulling the covers up to my chest. I stared at the television and looked at this weirdly long commercial some more, spotting a couple more differences. The tiles, well matching the color, white, and shape, diamond, of the ones in my own living room, had their own pattern to them. Contrasting starkly with the white tiles were long strokes of black paint, overlapping whichever tile haphazardly. It was crudely done, it seemed. There was no rhyme or reason to which tiles had the paint and which didn't, and the walls in the television weren't the same as mine at all. These were a deep crimson red. I wondered how I hadn't noticed that before. Still chuckling to myself, I laid on my back and stared at the darkness above me, where the glow of my television didn't reach. My eyes closed before I knew it, and I fell asleep, the strange skittering and clicking penetrating my resting mind and serenading me in my dreamless sleep. Which brings us to now. I've really only woken up a half hour ago, if I'm being honest. I didn't feel really tired. It was a call that woke me, and I hate to admit it, but it kind of spooked me. It was probably just a couple of kids prank calling. I know I used to do the same, but the timing is weird, right? Even I have to admit that. The phone rang loudly next to my ear from a number I didn't recognize. Can't really remember it, honestly. It doesn't show up in my call history, but I swear I heard it. I promise, I'm not going crazy. The words, though, I do remember. It was a strange voice, high-pitched and strained. It spoke as if it had trouble breathing.
The devil's called a while now, and you've failed to hang up. I've wanted you for a long time, and now your time has come.
But that wasn't really the scariest part. I was laying on my back still when I woke up. I stared facing the direction I had when I was falling asleep the night before. But now instead of darkness, the daylight offered me a different view. On my white ceiling I saw footsteps. Well, I guess I can't call them footsteps. I don't really know what they are. But that was the first thought that popped into my head. Long streaks of black adorn the ceiling now. Or who knows how long they have been there. I guess I've never really looked. There was no pattern I could discern from the black streaks. They move every which way. Most stop abruptly in the middle of the room, but a select few extend all the way to the edge where ceiling and wall meet. Then they disappear. And now I'm just scared. Even typing this out, I can't stop biting my nails. I feel like a hand is reaching out from behind me, waiting for me to drop my guard so it can snatch me up and take me. I look back every 30 seconds, and of course, I see nothing. Why would I? I need a distraction, but I can't even turn on my television for comfort. Called a while now. I wonder if this all started with the figure in my television a couple nights ago. For some reason, I can't shake the feeling that wasn't really the beginning. Maybe it started a long time ago. Maybe I just didn't catch the signs, and I couldn't stop it before it escalated. Maybe the humming of the house, the creaking of the floors, the barking of my dog did mean something. Maybe that's how it starts. Do you guys ever hear noises like that? It wasn't always cursed, they told me. When they grew up, as I was told, the forest was a place of peace. You could always find the perfect rock to sit on and tell the forest your problems. It always listened, and sometimes, if you listen hard, and with a little bit of luck, the forest will help you. Just remember though, never listen to the voices of the forest these days, even if they sound friendly. Grandma Harriet was one of the nicest people you'll meet. She sold cakes at the market and gave the money to any kid that asked for some. She always had a smile on her face and could light up a room in an instant. Everybody loved her, and she loved everyone. Of course, that was before the cancer. Nobody saw it coming. It hit like a speeding train. It was slow at first, but day after day, she gradually started getting weaker. Eventually she couldn't move her legs, then she couldn't move her arms. She was withering with the change in season. She died by the end of December. Every person in town went to her funeral, which was held in the forest against my grandpa's best wishes. Harriet Counson was loved by all. She sadly passed away this Saturday from leukemia. She cared for everyone and everything, regardless of what others thought. She'll be missed dearly by all. My grandpa looked frightened of the forest around him, and deeply saddened. He silently wept, not wanting others to hear him. Tears were shed by all though. Even the animals in the forest seemed to notice she was gone, sitting by watching in a somber manner. She always fed the animals. She even saved a squirrel from drowning once. He visited every day to give Grandma Harriet whatever he found. One winter she fed the deer right out of her hands because they were having trouble finding food. The animals trusted her and she loved them. My grandpa seemed to be affected more than anybody. Grandma Harriet and Grandpa Elliot had a happy marriage for over 70 years. He shut everyone out and became very reclusive after the funeral. He would only come out to eat or drink, and would never talk to anyone unless he was out of his room. After a few months, he died of old age. The day before he passed away, he came out of his room and sat on the couch. When he sat down, I instinctively ran over to him and gave him a hug while saying, "Grandpa, are you okay? I thought you died." "Not yet, but I wanted to let you know something before I do." He lowered his voice and leaned in close to my ear. In a harsh whisper he said, "I tried my best to stop them. I really did, but with trying I made it worse. You told me last night that it could make the voices inaudible to anyone, and all it would cost is the rest of my life. I'm on the last 3 hours I have left. I love you, kiddo, but never go back to the forest after the funeral. Never. Do you understand?" I nodded my head in agreement and asked what he meant by it, and what did he mean by his last 3 hours. He pushed the question away and just said with small tears forming at the corners of his eyes, "I love you. Never forget that. I have to go now, but please don't go into the forest." I responded with, "I love you too, Grandpa Elliot. I love you too, and I promise not to go into the forest." He patted my head and went back to his room, sobbing into his blue handkerchief. He was buried in the forest right next to Grandma, but the night after the funeral is when the echo started quieting. At first, they were sounding like a person talking to you at a normal volume. They started getting so quiet you might have thought it was the wind blowing through the trees. After my grandparents died, I went to the forest every day, clutching the clover Grandma Harriet gave me, hoping, just hoping to get a response. I know Grandma and Grandpa told me to never go into the forest, but I was desperate. I so badly just wanted to hear their voices just one last time. Now I regret ever stepping foot in there. I wandered deep into the dense forest, near where my grandparents were buried. Nobody knew I was leaving, so I didn't expect anyone to come for me anytime soon. Clutching the clover in my left hand, I found what felt like the perfect rock for me. At least it still has that quality, I mumbled under my breath. I sat down, and through tears I said, "Hey Grandma, Grandpa, please answer me. I want to hear your voice one more time." After a few seconds I heard a response. It sounded like my Grandma Harriet. The voice said, "Turn around, I want to look at you." Stunned that I even heard anything, I turned around instantly and saw the most horrendous creature imaginable to me. It had a foul odor emanating from a mouth of needle-sharp teeth. Its hands were oozing blood from every crevice, with sharp razor claws originating from the palm. Its head was split open at the mouth and hung limply toward the ground. The legs stood stiffly and bulged from the black liquid pouring out of the veins. It didn't move though, just stared, but I never wanted to have to look at it again, but now I'm forced to. I heard another voice, but this time it sounded like Grandpa Elliot, but with a bit more struggle in the buttery voice of his. He said, "Run, kiddo, never return. I love you." Like a rubber band being let go, I dashed towards home, a good 2 miles away. After running for what felt like an hour, I got to the edge of the forest. I tried stepping across the threshold of the forest when I was transported back to the rock. I again tried to get home, but like an echo in a tunnel, I was back where I started. Attempt after attempt, and I can't get out. Every time I hear Elliot say, "Try again, you'll get it next time." The creature moves about a foot every time I try to escape, getting ever so closer to where I started. I don't know how to get out. After every attempt, I get slower and slower. I can barely move now. I've been trapped here for well over a week. My phone won't run out of battery, and I haven't had to eat or sleep. I can't find my Clover, and I don't remember how many attempts I've had. I remember my grandpa's warning. Never listen to the voices of the forest these days, even if they sound friendly. Now I wish I followed his advice. There are a bunch of abandoned buildings around my hometown. You know the tale. You were a good industry town, and then everything was outsourced or failed, and the town turned into a half-ghost town. Since the early 90s, the aim of every high schooler is the same: try and escape this damn place. Not many did, of course, because we were all also poor as crap. Most of the buildings still have the production lines that made them successful in their previous life. It became a common pastime for myself and friends to hang out in them. Why? Who knows? Nothing else to do, and they were usually safe to be in. Most still had solid foundations, and any staircases that were a bit too creaky and broken, we would just avoid. If we ever heard what was suspected to be a homeless person, we would bolt out of the place as fast as we could. It was the summer of 1999 when we decided to explore a bit of a farther reach from our small town. It was still only a 20-minute drive from my friend Kieran's house, but the spot we were going to explore was far more interesting than the rest. We had heard from Kieran's dad that an old hotel stood on the hillside near the house, the Black Cliff Hotel, named in reference to the black rock of the cliff it was built upon. It was built about 1948, but that's all Kieran's dad knew. With a quick online search, we found out a lot more. It was an exclusive clubhouse for wealthy families. It had a spa, tennis courts, 2 swimming pools, and a grand ballroom where it held its parties. Once a year they had a masquerade ball, and it was a favorite to the regular guests. You couldn't get in without a proper masquerade mask, and an entry ticket costing about $750 per guest. Right up until it was abandoned. It had at least broke even financially every year, usually making a fair profit for a one-off hotel that isn't a part of a chain. It was abandoned because during the 1963 masquerade ball, a fire broke out due to too many candles being used around cheap fabric curtains. The curtains were used as decor around the huge windows and doors, so when one caught fire, it spread incredibly quickly and left every exit a fiery trap. Once one of the sets of doors were opened, the remaining members escaped. 23 people died in the fire, and a further 59 were either killed or seriously injured from smoke inhalation. The place was an utter wreck, and it wasn't financially viable to rebuild, especially considering so many of the regular guests were harmed in the fire. As soon as we found these details out, we made plans to go visit one night. When we got there, it was eerie as hell. Half of the building just had perished naturally over time. The foundation's still strong, most of the structure standing without issues, but it was obvious where the ballroom had been. The outside had been made of brick and concrete, so was now a burnt-out skeleton. It looked far more dangerous and far more alluring to explore. We had backup flashlights, respirators, and backpacks of first aid supplies just in case. There were 4 of us, and we split into 2 groups, with a walkie-talkie for each pair. Myself and Andy were one pair, while Kieran and Anthony were the other. They would explore the burnt area first. We would go through the non-burnt area, and then we'd meet in the middle and swap over to explore the rest of the place. The non-burnt building was as expected. A bit boring, nothing we hadn't seen before. Old magazines about the place, the room keys still hanging up behind the front desk. The staircase was pretty solid, so we explored the 2nd floor. Again, nothing spectacular. "Hey morons, over." Kieran's voice came over the walkie-talkie. "What's up, jerk?" "Over," I replied, as we giggled over our fantastically original code names. "Burnt ballroom is a dud. It's just gross in here. Everything rotten and waterlogged. Over." The roof had collapsed sometime during its abandonment, so the rain must have flooded it over and over again. "I'm not going in there then," Andy said as he fingered through some of the 1950s women's magazines. "Hate the smell of waterlogged stuff. It always smells of crap. Oh, come on. It's the whole point of this trip. I gave him a playful push. We met Kieran and Anthony at our meeting point, and Andy continued to whine about not wanting to see the burnt part. It's seriously not worth it, dude. Just dirt and burnt wood, and stagnant water. Kieran's nose wrinkled thinking about the smell. Well, I want to. I'll keep the walkie-talkie and my flashlight. I'll be out in like 10 minutes. I'll see you in a bit. I was so stubborn, but in my defense, it was still going to be far more interesting than the rest of the hotel. It was a short walk to the burnt-up doors that led to the ballroom. Once I got near, I turned and shone the lights at my friends. They were all standing around, giving me the bird. I gave it back with a smile and said, over, into the walkie-talkie. I pushed the door open with ease and went in back first, continuing to watch my friends give me fun variations of their middle fingers, rolling it up, blowing it up like a balloon. I cackled in a manic way as I made my way inside. I turned to face the ballroom and stopped dead in my tracks. The door fell closed behind me, and its slam made all the guests turn their masked faces towards me. There were so many people there. At least 100, maybe more. Each had a smart black tuxedo or a glamorous dress on, and a unique masquerade mask. There were rabbits, horses, lions, butterflies, penguins. As many animals as I could think of. Every single one of them was staring at me for making such noise with the door. I stared back at them. A soft piece of classical music was playing, which I didn't recognize, but it was the only sound other than my racing heartbeat. In a flash, a male figure stood in front of me. He wore a tux, and his mask resembled a goat, with paper horns sticking up high over his slicked black hair. "You're not a guest of this hotel. Get out. This is a very exclusive party." He roared at the top of his voice. His lips peeled up over gritted teeth. He near busted my eardrums, he was so loud and so close. I fell back into the door, and the crowd of masked strangers gasped in horror. I felt an intense heat suddenly raise around me, but couldn't see anything through the panicking crowd. The masks pushed through each other, like headless chickens, not sure where to run to as the heat got worse. I had to crawl on hands and knees past the rushing legs and heels of the partygoers. Somehow, I managed to wedge the wooden door open. As I turned back to watch the crowd, an angry orange glow was absorbing the heads and bodies of the further half of the crowd. Their screams were drowning into the fire that their bodies fueled. I shoved myself through the door as I felt a hand grab a hold of my ankle. I looked back to see the goat man, his teeth still gritted. I kicked and kicked until his grasp finally let, and I tumbled out through the door. My friends were stood around me as I landed hard onto the puddle of stagnant water. As the door closed behind me, after a moment of simply looking at me, they all began to laugh, and hard. "You get scared, dude? You're such a baby." Kieran laughed at me as he helped me off the ground. I didn't, or couldn't, say a word. Just whimpered and softly laughed along with them. They wouldn't have ever believed me. I don't know whether to believe myself or not, but I thought I'd share it with you guys. The time I went to a very exclusive party. I've never been a fan of basements. Even when I was a kid, I never went down into the basement at my childhood home in Denver, Colorado. It's been years and both of my parents are gone due to a car accident. My childhood home was left to me. At first I was reluctant to live in it and thought about selling it, but something in me felt I had to be there, that I had to keep it, so I did. I moved in at the start of fall and changed a few things by selling most of my parents' things and bought new furniture. A couple days went by, and I would start to hear what sounded like stuff being moved around in the basement at night. I refused to go down there. If anything, it was probably a mouse, or something, and to be honest, they freaked me out as much as that basement did. Weeks went by and still I would hear the noises in my basement. One day I finally had enough of it, so I gathered up my courage, grabbed a flashlight, because there was barely any light down there, due to the lack of windows, and I'm not even sure how well the lights worked. I stood at the door for a few minutes, taking deep breaths, trying to calm myself down before grabbing the doorknob, turning on my flashlight, and opening it. I stayed at the top of the stairs shining the light down. I took one more deep breath, You can do this, Samantha. Just take a quick look around and then leave. That's all you have to do, I tell myself, then slowly make my way down the stairs. As I got halfway down, I heard a rustling sound come from deep within the basement. Hello? I asked. I'm not sure what I was expecting to hear in response. If I did, I'm pretty sure that I would have dropped the flashlight and ran back up the stairs. I didn't want to continue down, but I did. I willed myself to go forward, then stopped at the last step, shining the light around. The basement was somewhat empty, other than the odds and ends of my parents' things. A sudden shuffling noise snapped my head to the part of the basement to my left, and I shined the light over to it. Hello? I asked again, like an idiot, but still no answer. The next thing I knew, a box fell over, and I jumped, dropping the lights, and ran up the stairs, shutting the door behind me, and leaned against it, trying to catch my breath and calm down my heart. That night I hardly slept. I kept hearing noises down there, down in the darkness. I had the TV on in my room and kept the light on. I know that may seem childish, but for years of not going down there, and when I finally do, I get scared by a box falling. The next morning came, and I managed to get 4 hours of sleep before starting my day. I made myself some coffee. Well, a lot of coffee. Got dressed, then sat down at the kitchen table and began to work. I had a job that I could do from home for some health insurance company, so it was nice not having to endure the morning traffic and listen to other coworkers gossip about each other. As I finished up, the day my phone rang. I don't know why, but I jumped. I looked at it and saw that it was my best friend Katie. Hey, I said, answering the phone.
Hey you, what are you up to?
She asked me. Just finished up work.
Blah blah blah, boring. Let's get dinner tonight. My treats.
She tells me. Katie is one of those friends you have that is always blunt about what she says, and likes to have fun. She's responsible in ways, has a good paying job, but has her moments where she acts like a college student, just wanting to have fun. Yeah, sure, that sounds good. Where do you want to go? I asked her, and she told me the name of the restaurant. After showering and getting dressed in a somewhat nice outfit, that would also pass as dance clothes, because anytime I go out to dinner with Katie, she ends up dragging me to some random club, only to end with me going home while she leaves with some random guy that she flirts with. Don't get me wrong, I love Katie like a sister, but there are nights when she would bring me out, even though all I would want to do is sit at home, curled up on the couch with a book or watching TV. I guess I'm sort of an introvert that way. After a nice dinner, and of course, as I suspected, a few hours at a dance club, I headed home. I walked up the deck to my front door and unlocked it. As I walked in, I turned on the light and saw that my house had been trashed. Cupboards opened up, boxes of food all over the counters and floors. My table flipped over. It looked like someone broke in with the intent of robbing me, but everything that was of value was untouched. I took one more look around at the sight before me, thinking to myself, how could someone break in when I had the door locked? I stepped out onto my deck and called the cops. The dispatcher informed me that it would be a while until someone could come out. Made sense, considering I lived a few miles out of town, and she told me to go back to my car and wait. After I did, I locked the doors. I was a young woman living by herself away from town, so I can't risk some kind of serial killer getting to me. I finished texting Katie, then looked up at my house. I really shouldn't have, because as I did, I could swear that I saw something moving across the only window in my basement. My blood ran cold as I could feel the blood drain from my face. I didn't move. I couldn't move. I was so lost in thought that the sound of a knock on my car window made me jump, and I turned to see a cop standing there. I tried my hardest to calm down my heart as I unlocked the doors and got out. "Evening, ma'am. You called about a possible break-in?" The cop asked me, but I couldn't find my voice. "Ma'am?" He asked me again, and I looked at him. "Yeah, I did," I tell him, and he looked at me, then his partner. "Ma'am, are you alright?" He asked, and I shook my head. I told him about what I saw in my basement window. They both exchanged a look, then he urged me to stay here as him and his partner went to my house guns raised. After what felt like hours, they finally came out and walked over to me. "Ma'am," the partner said to me, and I looked at him. "It's all clear in there. Other than the evidence of a break-in, we didn't find anything of someone being in here, he told me, and I looked back at my house. You look a little shaken. Do you have anyone you can call? Someone to stay with you? He asked me, and I shook my head. No, I don't, I told him. It wasn't a lie. I did have a friend I could call, but she was busy. Well, getting busy. We can call someone out here to watch the house for you if you'd like. The one cop tells me, and I looked at him. I once again couldn't find my voice, so I just nodded my head. The cop's partner grabbed his radio, and I could hear him calling for a lookout as I once again looked at my house. I decided to wait out in my car until the cop came to keep watch at my house. He showed up, and then I headed inside to start cleaning up, then showered. Looked at the cop who was watching my house, then sat on my couch turning on the TV. Then I heard it. A rustling noise coming from my basement again. I considered going outside and signaling the cop, but like all those dumb girls in bad horror movies, I got up and quietly walked over to the basement door. I didn't open the door, but I pressed my ear to it, and what I heard chills me to the bone to this day. Must be quiet, or they will come. Must be quiet, or they will come. I heard a voice repeat over and over again. I put my hand over my mouth to keep myself from screaming. Must be quiet, or they will come. The voice said again. I didn't know what to do. I was frozen. There was someone in my house. If I started running to the front door, the person would hear me and either run up the stairs after me or find a way to hide like last time. I decided that I would quietly walk back to my front window, where the cop was, and try to signal him somehow. As I made my way to the living room, I stepped on a floorboard, causing it to squeak. I froze. I heard a noise down below, and prayed to myself that whoever it was wouldn't come up the stairs and kill me. After staying completely still, and not hearing any more noise from the basement, I moved quietly, yet quickly to the left. I grew up in this house, so I knew where the floorboards are that made noise, except for the one that I stepped on by accident. I made my way to the window, and saw the cop was looking down. Damn, I whispered to myself. How would I get his attention? I looked around me, afraid to move anymore, because I didn't to cause any more noise. And there I found it, a flashlight that I kept next to the TV in a drawer on the entertainment center. I pulled it out and turned it on, flashing it at the cop. It took a few moments before he looked up and got out of his car. I put the flashlight down and tried my best to tell him that someone was in my basement. He looked at me confused at first, but then I tried again. He finally got what I was saying and pulled out his radio, probably calling for help, then mouthed for me to wait there and not move. I nodded and saw him pull his gun, making his way to my house. I stayed there motionless. That wasn't until I heard the doorknob to the basement jiggle. I panicked, looking back out the window, not seeing the cop anymore. I couldn't move. I grabbed the flashlight again, hoping to try and use it against whoever was going to emerge from my basement. I listened as the doorknob clicked as it turned. I swallowed the lump in my throat as tears burned my eyes, while the door slowly crept open. At this moment, I'm not sure why, I was thankful that the door was facing away from me. I didn't even have time to react before the sound of sirens snapped me out of my frozen state, and I saw the basement door closed, followed by fleeting footsteps going down the stairs. Just then, my front door opened, and two cops looked at me, and I shakingly pointed to the basement door, and the two went over to it as the cop who had been watching my house stayed by me. I heard sounds of struggle coming from the basement, then silence. My heart was racing. Then the two came out of the basement, and the cop by me went to them. They had a silent conversation before one of them approached me and escorted me outside to my deck, in which I sat down. What is it? I finally asked him, and before he could say anything, an ambulance pulled up, and I saw paramedics run inside. After a long while, they came out with a stretcher carrying a body. The body of a lifeless man covered up by a sheet. The events of what happened have stayed with me, even to this day, because what I don't know was that on the TV in my living room was a breaking news report. A patient from the local asylum had escaped weeks ago, and the police were on the lookout for him. The patient had occupied my basement of my home before I moved in. We'd gotten a call to head out one evening, multiple in fact, about a man falling at a front yard barbecue. Seemingly losing his breath and passing out on scene. Knowing how dire the situation could be, we ran to the ambulance and sped down the road to the house, arriving 5 minutes later to a scene of frenzied spectators, and the man's wife crying as she sat on the ground next to him. It's quite amazing the level of detail the brain picks up during traumatic times. You may take notice of the strange rocks that litter the ground, the way the grass sways in the mid-afternoon breeze, or the clothes of an onlooker. When Harold died, I noticed the way the sun was casting its final rays across the open street, warming the backs of the spectators as we performed our inspection of him, ensuring he was dead and not in a state of arrhythmia. I noticed the pale blue of his lips as they blended slowly into the ever-paling and ever-cooling white of his face, a few shades softer than the piercing blue of his eyes. Suffocation, no doubt. Although the noises of the world were blurred to me, I noticed his wife, wailing her final remorseful goodbyes, screaming it wasn't fair, that there weren't signs of anything. He simply dropped. Her tears traced down her elegant smooth face, dripping onto both her baby blue dress and the dark asphalt below. I noticed the other EMTs moving to the ambulance to grab the heavy black body bag. That would be the first case for Harold's now deceased body, their movements slow and deliberate as they carried themselves, losing themselves in the tasks so as to not think about the life we'd lost on this site. I noticed police moving onto the scene, anxious to begin their questioning while witnesses still lingered and the body was still fresh. They moved with purpose. Their forensic counterparts moved slowly, their eyes scrutinizing every detail of the scene, as though it would give them a better answer than anyone present could. I knelt over Harold and was moving my hand slowly up to his eyes so they could no longer look unfocused into the orange sky above. My eyes caught movement, however, the flickering movement of his tongue in his mouth, a remnant muscle spasm or something else. My hand stopped as it moved again. I moved my hand over to his mouth and pulled it open with my thumb and forefinger. There was nothing there, yet the tongue moved yet again. Using my other hand, I grabbed the tip of his tongue and moved it towards the roof of his mouth. A gasp escaped as something gave way, and I realized why his tongue had been moving. The gasp turned into a scream as thousands of spiders flowed out of his throat and onto the street surrounding us. I heard screams from the spectators and a horrified wail from his wife. I scampered to my feet, fear clutching my heart as I stared in abject horror at the scene unfolding in front of me. The spiders continued in their stream from the man's mouth, flowing on the ground around him. They moved as a solid mass. By now, spectators were screaming as they ran, and his poor wife was backing up slowly, still crying as she watched the arachnids flee from their host. They were large by standard means, not as large as tarantulas, but not as small as a common house spider. They had shiny black bodies that shimmered in the light, and had an oily texture. Nausea rose in my throat, and I could feel the bile beginning to rise. I threw up several times before my fellow EMTs were able to calm me down, but they weren't close when it started. They didn't see the way that the spiders pulled out his tongue as they ran. They didn't see how some of them were covered in blood and viscera, as if they'd been digging through his body to escape. They didn't see his abdomen sinking as they flew out of his mouth. The rest of the day kinda blurred by. My mind was unable to get over the scene I'd witnessed, and the fear had still clutched in my chest. It's by far the strangest call I'd ever received, and I never got any answers about it. A lot of times you don't hear if your patient has made it or not. You drop them off, and away you go. With deaths, it's even fewer. They go to the morgue, and you don't hear about the autopsies. Looking back now, the familiar question enters my mind once more. How did they get there? Hey everybody, first off, thank you guys for making it to the end of the video if you're listening to this. I'm not really sure how to explain all of this, but it's getting increasingly hard to upload quality with quantity. Preferably, I've always wanted both at the same time, quantity and quality, so that I can post often and videos are good and people are looking forward to it. But as of late, my email has been slowing down quite a bit, and it's been getting really hard to find stories. I never want to be that channel that just posts whatever just to make that hour-long mark. I never want to post something that I don't feel is interesting, scary, just holds attention, you know, one of those or all of those I want every single story to contain. As of right now, it's just really difficult to post every other day like I was. And I don't want to sound ungrateful. I don't want to sound like people need to post more stories and people need to send me more stories. Like, it's totally cool. I'm very thankful that anybody sends me stories. I'm very thankful that anybody allows me to share their stories. I'm very thankful that people listen to the videos. I'm very, very, very grateful. So I'm not trying to make it sound like a bad thing at all. And I really hope it's not coming off that way, because that would never be my intention. So basically all of this is just to say that as of right now, I'm just going to be uploading as much as I can when I can. Some days it might be every other day, some days it might be every 3. Hopefully we don't have any more where it's 5 days without a narration video. I don't think we've gone 5 days without a narration video in probably almost a year now. Or at least not so far this year. That's a guarantee, not so far this year. Sometimes you just gotta work with what you got, and I don't want to post stories that are not interesting or not scary or whatever, because it kind of gives the channel a bad rep. And if somebody finds me off that video, they're going to be like, oh yeah, I didn't like the last one that I listened from Slumber read, so I'm not going to listen to the next one. I'm not going to subscribe. I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do that. I want this channel to be a place where you click on the video and you know with a guarantee that you'll enjoy the content. Because I know if I was a listener, it would be pretty easy to notice if I was just uploading whatever just to make that hour-long mark. I like to be transparent with you guys. I like to keep you guys in the loop, so I just figured I'd explain all that real quick. If you are listening to this and you're like, hey, I have a really interesting story and I'd love to send it into the channel, the email is rylhstories@gmail.com. It's kind of funny how it works, because when my channel was smaller than it is now, I got a lot more stories sent in than I do now. I've kind of noticed as the channel grows, I get sent less and less stories. And just speculating here, I don't know for sure. I think that kind of has a lot to do with the mentality of, he's got a good sub count, there's probably so many people sending in stories, there's not a chance of mine being narrated, and I can guarantee you, I do not get sent as many stories as you might think. As of right now, the last few videos have been solely stories that I've gone out and looked for, and been blessed by the authors with the ability to narrate. Just a little bit of insight to how my my scheduling goes and how exactly I do everything. I go through my emails first. I always go through the submissions first and foremost. And then in order to make the hour-long mark, I'll go out and I'll look for good stories that can fill out that hour-long time frame, because I know you guys enjoy the hour-long videos. At this point, I feel it's hardly even worth uploading a video that's not an hour long, because that's just what's expected of me. And I enjoy doing that. There's no problem with that. As of right now, it's really tough to stay on the schedule that I was on. But yeah, I mean, that pretty much sums everything up. And I was also kind of panicking these past few days because I did that gaming stream and then I didn't post anything for 5 days. And I'm like, people are probably thinking I'm switching to gaming, which would never, ever, ever, ever be the case. I'm not the next PewDiePie. I'm not the next big gamer on the block. I'm not anything like that. I just figured as long as I don't have the ability to upload a narration video, we could kick back and get scared together playing some scary game. I think the next one I'm going to be streaming is Cry of Fear. And then after that, I'm going to do Resident Evil 7 Biohazard. Both games that I've never played, both games that I've been wanting to play for years. And I think it'd be cool to just share that experience with you guys. Hopefully I explained everything. Hopefully I didn't say or repeat myself too much or just ramble about useless facts. But it's nice to just talk to you guys sometimes. And as long as I'm here, thank you guys so much for the support. We're about to hit 55K, which is just mind-boggling to me. I can't even begin to wrap my head around that. But I'll close it up there. Thank you guys again for always supporting the channel. Thank you guys for making it to the end of this video. Thank you guys for everything. I hope you guys have a fantastic night, and I'll talk to you guys later. Good night, everyone.